This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
All right, welcome back. We're in session 10, part 2 of World of Engineering Management. I'm going to continue with my slides. Just put my screen up here and let's go back to the slides we were looking at before. We're now going to look at innovation, which is part of this week's buffet agenda. All right, we're going to start from this slide. There we go. We're up and running. So I did speak last week about innovation. I talk about innovation all the time, as you know. It has been the major focus of my research for many years now, and innovation from a wide variety of perspectives in business and engineering and consulting, most recently in things like the food industry and supply chain management and operations. There's many different areas in which I continue to research in innovation. At the moment, the latest project, and about to finish off a paper on this, is about entrepreneurial startups and what sort of key factors do they face in terms of innovation success. We're looking at a variety of startups in Australia. So it's obviously a very compelling, topic, and everyone wants it, but how do you achieve it? It's really quite difficult to say there is a magic elixir. It's impossible to say that there's a secret recipe. I do believe, after many years of researching about innovation, that there are a number of success factors that you could point to. And if you could cultivate some of those various elements of innovation within an organization, for example, you probably would increase greatly your chances to create innovation capability and therefore innovation performance in your organizations. So many times I'm asked to speak to groups around the country, non-academic groups, and speak in public, those kinds of things. And so I often do talk about some of the inventions and innovations that have come out of Australia that I'm most impressed with, but that sadly the majority of them had to be commercialized offshore because we were unable to raise the capital in Australia in order to get them off the ground. There are exceptions though, and so it's a bit of a walk through Australian history, so bear with me, but I do think that each country and each part of the world and each type of business has a different context. And so innovation needs to be considered within that context, because not everything works for every given situation in the same way. So I guess my big question is, how can we create value and a better future for Australia through innovation? And we know that innovation really means doing things that are new or different. It's about change. It can be about products or services, processes, methods, business models, but the key is that they create value. They add something more. And we see that in such a fast-paced environment, we see greater change all the time, and it's affecting every aspect of business. And it's also, if you take it in the context of COVID-19, we can see just how people have had to rally, and there have been some innovations already come out as a result of the COVID virus situation, but we can expect more. I mean, look at the push towards getting a vaccine and things like that. Sometimes innovations are driven by necessity, and that is the pace of change that I'm talking about, that we often see the need for that has to happen in a really rapidly changing environment. So it's innovation really is the way in which you can sustain competitive advantage, you know, over time, and it's again about creating value. So, you know, innovation and entrepreneurship, they are not, you know, they're not just ends in themselves. They're about that sustainable competitive advantage. They're about achieving organizational or personal goals. You know, in many cases with business, they're about financial goals, but we see increasingly a focus on social innovation where those goals might be non-financial goals. They're about improving some aspect of society, giving something back to society, which I think is becoming a more important driver for many young entrepreneurs who, you know, yes, they want to make money in order to sustain their business, but they also want to take some of those profits and turn them into give something back to society. So we see more and more of that going on. So in terms of Australia, Australia has a history of innovations that have, you know, made a global impact. And when I first came to Australia, I was really impressed with the amount of entrepreneurship that had occurred over time. Australians seem to really have come up with some amazing ideas. And I then went a little bit further and going back and looking at how were they commercialized, where were they commercialized, and what happened with some of these products. So some of them you'll be really familiar with. Some may surprise you, but let's have a look. This is something that whether you're Australian or not, you're probably familiar with, and some of you love it, some of you hate it. When I first came to Australia, I couldn't stand the smell of it. I've built up a little bit more of a taste for Vegemite now. A food chemist friend of mine said, "Oh, Marianne, it's made of a particular combination of vitamin B and yeast, and you grew up eating Canadian wheat that has very high levels of this vitamin B in it, but Australian wheat does not have that same amount." So I only developed a taste for a Vegemite after living in Australia for a year or two, and this food chemist friend of mine says, your body was craving more of that vitamin B, and that's why you started to you know, be less resistant to the taste and the smell of Vegemite. I don't know if that's the case, but anyway, they had a product and it's been around for a long time. For many years, it was manufactured by the Kraft Corporation, and it's actually now in Australian hands. The Bega company has bought the rights to Vegemite, and they are now manufacturing. Kraft did manufacture it here in Australia for decades and decades, but the Bega company is now using the original plant down in South Melbourne. They're manufacturing the Vegemite now. Many of you will be familiar with this Hills hoist that populates many a backyard, especially in older suburbs and things like this. This was an Australian invention for drying clothes. And I guess for early play equipment, if you didn't have anything to play with in your backyard, you could swing on it as a child. So the Hills hoist, an Australian company that, you know, it made a lot of money selling these because in its heyday, this is, you know, in the Australia's nice warm weather, this is an ideal way to dry your clothes, and you know, what better way to do it in those early days. Now this one is this is an old picture, and deliberately so. The cochlear implant, this is the early version of the cochlear implant. And Cochlear, the company, was started here in Australia, and I'm very pleased to say, I mean, it's still located in Australia. It's in the technology park adjacent to Macquarie University in Sydney. They trade on the stock exchange. They are globally significant because they patented this technology. Some amazing ideas have come out in medicine, research and development from Australia, and this is one of them. Now, of course, the way that the implant looks, I mean, this is a very common surgery now, and it's a very common technique for allowing deaf people to hear. And they're virtually, you virtually don't notice them. All of this stuff just is not there anymore. You just, everything is so miniaturized now. But that is an innovation upon an innovation, that, you know, that they're bringing out newer and more advanced forms of the cochlear implant. The surgery is now routine. All of these things are constant incremental innovations. You would call this cochlear implant a radical innovation because it was brand new, the big light bulb moment, nobody had done it before. But the constant improvements year by year on miniaturization and the surgical techniques and so forth, that is what we consider to be incremental innovation. Well, the dual flush toilet, who would have known it, that this originated as an idea in Australia? So hats off to them. It is something that we see so regularly, and it's part of a, you know, it's part of a water saving, you know, sort of philosophy and so forth. That in itself is an innovation, and we continue to see variations on this rule, but certainly it's a very powerful, but sort of it's a daily thing. We probably look at those kinds of things every day, but never think about it as an innovation or anything like that. So I had a laugh when I found this one. Now, ultrasound. I was not aware of the fact that ultrasound originated in Australia, that it was developed, the technology was developed in Australia, but of course had to be commercialized offshore. And in the early days, I mean, this is a very, very early scan here of a baby, but we use ultrasound for everything now. You know, it is very, very popular for, you know, doing scans if you have a sports injury, or if, you know, if there's any kind of a first point of, you know, investigation. If there is a medical issue, there's some kind of, you know, you're looking to find a diagnosis for something, is to start with, if it's internal in the body, is to start with an ultrasound. So they are so commonplace nowadays, whereas before this was very exotic technology, and people would marvel at the fact that they could actually see a baby, for, you know, on a screen like this. So very, you know, a very positive innovation. And again, related to babies, the baby capsule was invented in Australia, and again commercialized offshore. But you know, no one with, I think it's a legal requirement now, you have to have baby capsules in cars and things like that. So obviously this is, you know, an invention that had, you know, a long-lasting effect. So innovations can be profound and they can be positive, but they can be what we consider to be quite everyday, normal things these days. All right, this one you may or may not be familiar with. I know you engineers are probably quite interested in, you know, things like cars, motor racing. RaceCam was developed in Australia in early days, and you know, when we had races going at Bathurst, which you may be familiar with, and so this RaceCam was you know, trialed and developed to actually give us vision of the cars racing in, particularly in the Bathurst car race, which happens every year. Here's another one that I think is a very interesting case study. By the way, the RaceCam has now, you know, gone into many different iterations, including the ones that you see on let me just, oh, I won't go back, that you see on Formula One, that you see that kind of thing. But I was quite amused that the similar technology is now being used on horse races, where they put a camera on the jockey's helmet. All of these things have arisen from that same innovation in camera technology. Okay, let's talk about Speedo. Speedo is an Australian company that came up with this new type of fabric that was intended to, you know, allow swimmers to power through water as efficiently as possible. And over the years, they have trialed numerous types of outfits and so on. You might recall that in some past Olympics, there were attempts at people wearing full suits, and runners too, not just swimmers, but let's stick with swimmers. I think at one point, Ian Thorpe, who's a very famous Australian swimmer, won many world medals, world championships and also Olympic medals, was wearing a full Speedo swimsuit, which I think then were disallowed from the Olympics anyway. There's a massive story just in that. But they have managed to stay in business and stay alive and create, each year they create some kind of new tweak to their technology and to their products and product mix. So it's they are one of those success stories where they've been able to stay successful and keep their business going, even though they do sell to various customers around the world. This is what keeps them going, but they haven't had to leave Australia to do that, or sell to overseas interests. So that's one thing that you may or may not be aware of. Solar Heart water heaters. Well, you might see ads for them. You might see the name here and there, but look at that old version of a Solar Heart. That was an Australian invention. And in a way, you'd think, oh, not that surprising considering how much sun parts of Australia actually get. Why not harness this power and use it? But it is something that was originated here. Many different takes on it now. And of course, all you have to do is make some modification to an existing patent, for example, and then you patent that patent, and then you've got your own, you've got your own product. But the idea, the innovation came here from Australia. I'm not sure the extent to which you're aware that plastic money also, originated in Australia. And so the plastic bills that we have now, they also have like a hologram, which is called an exogram. And that technology also was innovated here in Australia and was picked up in various countries quite quickly. I know that Canada, because I was born in Canada, so the technology was adopted really quickly in Canada, and they have also got very, very colorful money now in comparison to their neighbors down south in America, who have I think the most boring looking currency in the world. But I think maybe this was one way that Canadians could be different from the Americans. So they were really quick on the innovation uptake here. So they bought into the technology really quickly. And New Zealand did as well. So if you've been to New Zealand or seen New Zealand currency, it's also very colorful, very similar to our bills and also those in Canada. But this technology has gone around the world now. There are a lot of countries that have adopted this technology, and part of it was for it was enhanced security that came from the exogram, the hologram technology, so that less counterfeiting. It was more difficult, way more difficult to counterfeit this type of currency. Now, the Australia telescope, this is a curious beast, and we innovated a lot in the early days of space travel because we did obviously have telescopes that astronomers, scientists would be using to look at the heavens. But once the space race started in the 1950s and 60s, then there was an innovation opportunity for people in Australia to build telescopes that would actually assist with monitoring of any kind of space travel that was going on. Because remember, in those early days, the technology was required, to monitor any orbits of the Earth, in the southern hemisphere. We needed to have these kinds of telescopes. So Australia really played a very seminal role in monitoring, the early unmanned space ships, but also the moon landing. So many things that are going on, and still to this day we rely on our giant telescopes. Now they're out for the most part. They're out in places like Forbes and Parkes, which is sort of in very rural areas of Australia. But we do have a massive installment outside of Canberra. And we do still play quite a large role, but there's been a lot of technology sharing in terms of innovations for development of telescopes and so on. And it's really nice to see that Australia has played for such a long time such an important, taking such a leadership role too in rolling out this technology. But, you know, like anything, these are just a handful of examples that I wanted to share with you. You know, there are a lot of challenges that face innovation in Australia, and they are, as I say, there's contextual issues in every landscape. And for Australia, we have a giant, giant country, you know, but a very small population relative to the size of the geography. We are also very isolated, Australia. So those of you who came from other countries, you know how far it is to get from anywhere to here, except maybe from, you know, from New Zealand. It does take some time to get to Australia. It takes us a long time to go other places. That geographical isolation means that we're not close to other markets, big markets. We also have competition from those adjacent markets, say in Asia. We have very high labor costs in Australia, in you know, in comparison to our Asian neighbors. So that makes it very difficult to be competitive. I would say that these issues are largely responsible for the decline and closure of car manufacturing in Australia, which was a very sad time, but it just could not be sustained under the current situation. So, you know, these factors have not helped Australia in the sense of being able to retain a vibrant, you know, what was once a very vibrant, you know, industry like car manufacturing. There are always problems with gaining enough venture capital. We're a small, you know, country, so it's very hard to find enough people or people with enough money to commercialize innovations on a global basis. So that's why most innovators will go overseas in order to find the venture capital that they need to commercialize their innovations. Getting something to market is a long and expensive process. And so while we have no shortage of people with great ideas, we do have that shortage of capital to be able to make them come alive. And, you know, obviously innovation happens across all sorts of different walks of life. It's not just, you know, laboratories and research and development and that sort of thing. It's not always a high-tech area. It's something that can be nurtured in all, you know, in all types of organizations and in all walks of life. It's really about change, and a lot of it is about continuous improvement, which is incremental innovation. And I think from that point of view, if we understand innovation to be, you know, a combination of the radical innovation, which are those big light bulb, big ideas, and then, you know, really that's something really special. But then the bulk of innovation is about 70% of innovation efforts are geared towards incremental innovations, which are ongoing improvements, quality improvements, continuous change, that sort of thing. And we can all contribute to innovation in that sense, because often I get asked by members of the public and so on, well, what can we do? Everybody talks about this innovation, but isn't it just about businesses? And of course, that's not the case. You know, innovation in essence is about knowledge and ideas. And so when you have something that can create value for shareholders, it's really the starting point is a different way of thinking about things, a different idea, a different bit of knowledge. And those bits of knowledge or new ideas can be in products, services, business models, or a combination of things in our operations. A number of areas where you can apply those ideas to create improvement. And so, you know, there are many things that you can think about in terms of improving your competitive advantage in a business. So, you know, the ways in which we compete in business are on various performance factors such as cost, quality, delivery, which is the speed. You know, we often talk about the speed of delivery, flexibility, or innovativeness. So you can seek to innovate in any of those, you know, different areas. You know, it doesn't have to be a giant light bulb every time, but by small step improvements, we are innovating as we go along. So something I've been working on for a long time is this notion of innovation capability. And the basic premise is that innovative organizations have capability to attract and retain creative people, motivated people, people who will generate knowledge, new ideas, and so on in the organization. Think about Google, where I don't think they have to spend any money on recruitment because so many people every year are sending their resumes unsolicited to Google because it has such a reputation of being a great place to work, being creative, innovative, and it does attract the best people in the industry because of its reputation. You know, there are companies in Australia and overseas that manage their innovation activities in across the organization sort of holistic manner, and there are good and bad examples of that everywhere. But I would say Google is one of those kinds of innovative organizations where they are achieving good levels of innovation performance because they attend to the various building blocks of innovation across the entire organization. And I think that if you really want to achieve innovation in your organization, you need to think about it as a system across the whole business, and that you need to think about all the various building blocks that make up innovation. So this is we've been working, Danny Sampson and I, Professor Sampson and I, wrote a book on innovation and entrepreneurship, creating value. And we have developed various iterations of this particular model. But basically, this model of systematic innovation capability really says that, in any organization, you have various building blocks of innovation inside that organization. So, they will be in all these various areas. So where do we start in terms of building more systematic innovation capability in an organization? Well, you need to start. Now, we've been talking about strategy, so I think you can understand that you need a strategy that highlights the importance of innovation. It could be in your value statement, your mission statement, but if you want to be the most innovative company in whatever business you're in, it probably has to be in your mission statement, and it does have to be in your strategy. And you then need leadership to have the vision, to articulate that vision and mission, and then to make sure that innovation rolls out across the entire business. So without this first step of strategy and leadership, you're not going to get very far in terms of systematic innovation capability. Now, we've divided these building blocks up into innovation capability areas and innovation activity areas, but really, if you think about this, I'll go one by one. You need to focus on who are your customers. If you are not attentive to that, how can you innovate, for the sake of your customers? You won't have a market for your innovations. And another thing we look at is open innovation, which simply means, do you have a dialogue with customers and maybe other stakeholders, suppliers, and so forth, to give you ideas on how to improve the kinds of products and services that you have? Another one here is in the area of human resource management, training, and learning. I think if you want to achieve innovation capability, you have to, as an HR professional, understand what kinds of skills, capabilities, and qualifications are needed in order to do that. What sort of people should you be seeking to bring into the organization? And once you select those people and bring them in, what sort of training and development should you be offering them to make sure that they maximize their opportunities for building your innovation capability across the entire organization? So it's a good example of how a support function like HR can actually become quite strategic if they're engaged in that kind of activity, rather than just processing payroll and counting up people's leave. In terms of sustainability, I think this is an area where a lot of innovation can take place, because we need to be mindful about, you know, how much harm are we doing to the environment, how much are we giving back to, you know, to society. So we need to be thinking about sustainability, not just on the financial level, but also on the environmental and social levels. And I've seen in many businesses, a focus on innovation means that they start to develop different ways to address those issues about sustainability, maybe creating clever ways to reduce waste, reduce emissions, give something back to society. All of those things come about because of a focus on sustainability. So many innovations and improvements have come out of a focus on that. All right, let's look at some of these other ones. Your management of innovation processes, and I have talked a bit about this before, that, you know, you need to have like a pipeline of innovations for the future, ideas for the future, possible projects, and so on. And you need to keep a close eye on that pipeline, because at any given point you have to make harsh decisions about which ones are going to get funded and going to go ahead, and the other ones are going to be killed off, as we say. And so you need strong management of those processes. You just can't let everything go forward, and you have to actually have some way in which you can judge the merits of any particular project that's in your innovation pipeline for the future. Culture and communication means that you need to set up an organizational culture where innovation is talked about all the time. Everybody understands what innovation means and the importance of innovation, and also, you know, that you speak the same language around innovation. That's how everybody's going to kind of come together, and everyone will be singing off the same song sheet, as we say. Now, in terms of operations and process or partnerships, this is more about, you know, how slick are your operations, but the partnerships are more about who do you choose for suppliers, and you know, a good partnership with a good supplier, you may be able to gain some insights from them as to, you know, ways in which you could innovate on, you know, various aspects of your products or services. So that's always important to have, you know, good partners. In terms of knowledge and technology, well, this is the backbone of innovation, really, because without good technology to back you up, you won't have the, you know, the agility and the, you know, the flexibility and so on that you need to really be competitive. And I think knowledge is a key element. I mean, without knowledge, we don't have any innovation anyway. So that's why I say it's a foundation, it's a backbone of innovation. So our idea is that, you know, if you're minding all of these various building blocks, including this initial one, which is your input, you will then, you know, have the capacity to, you know, to generate innovation performance. And that's fine. Innovation performance is great, and we can measure it on a number of different indicators. We work with between 10 and 12 various indicators, depending on what type of industry we're talking about. But, you know, innovation performance is fine. You can be the most innovative organization in the world, but if you are not turning that into the bottom line, business performance, then you're not creating any value per se. So it's about the bottom line. Unfortunately, this is the world of business. So we need to be able to make sure that we create value as a result of our innovation performance. That, you know, if you can create a whole series of very innovative products, but if no one wants to buy them, you have no business performance. That's what I'm trying to say. So we want to ensure that this business performance is what we're achieving. And of course, then we want to be able to, you know, take what we've measured and evaluated to make sure that we put that back in the loop, and that, you know, we're measuring in all these building blocks the effectiveness of the things we do to, you know, to establish systematic forms of innovation capability. Now, leadership, just with you know, with so many things I've been talking about so far this semester, leadership is very, very important in terms of, you know, making this happen. And so you need leadership to set the strategy and move it forward, You need leadership to support resourcing. You need leadership to make sure that things are monitored constantly, measured constantly. You need to make sure that leaders recognize and reward people who are engaged in the innovation processes and coming up with ideas, products, services, whatever those innovations might be. But the leader should also set the culture and the tone for the organization, and that's why leadership is so important in the innovation game. Also, I think you could appreciate as engineers that, the operating practices and resources for operations are very, very important, and will differentiate one organization from another in terms of their power and their performance. And I think it's also very important that we embed opportunities for innovation within our operations processes so that we can actually identify, because so much up to 30% of potential profit is lost in that murky world of operations. And so if we can actually look at those practices and find ways to improve, to innovate, to reduce waste, make things more lean. All of these things are innovations that do help to create value and increase the bottom line. So this is why we have to measure. If we don't measure, how will we know that we're even making any difference or any change? So I think the critical measure is, where's the value? Are we creating the value? And that will differ between different types of businesses and industries and so on, but it's a really important aspect to consider. Now, I've mentioned already that we need to understand what people will get motivated over. In some companies, it's about being recognized, and that's enough. Many people who work in academics or in science and technology and academic settings, they are very happy just to be, to be noticed, to get a research grant because someone believes in what they're trying to do, to be recognized with non-financial types of prizes. These things mean a lot in that kind of, like our sector, in the university sector. But there are other types of business where people are really on the cold, hard cash line. That's what makes them get excited. That's what makes them contribute innovative ideas and so on. It's fine, but there's no point trying to recognize people with the wrong sorts of rewards. So you have to have, you have to know what people are looking for in order to be able to make this work as a means of achieving innovation. The culture and behavior I've mentioned also before. I think it's very important to create a culture that is based on appreciation for innovation, that fosters innovation, and has clear lines of communication throughout, because that's how ideas get exchanged and things happen. I believe everyone has a role to play in innovation. And it's best that everybody is, involved in the process. It's no good to just put a bunch of people in incubators outside of the normal workings of an organization. They're just an outside, a group, and it's not a whole organization approach to innovation, which I don't think in the long run is very useful. So, we need to respect everybody's ability to contribute in some way to innovation processes. And then people often ask me, well, we're not in business, so how can we help? What can we do? Well, in this modern age of social media and everything, my goodness, we're all consumers. We all can have a voice through social media. We can provide ideas, we can provide feedback, and clever companies actually use this feedback mechanism or opportunity as a way to gain valuable insights on how to improve their products and services. What works, what doesn't work, what gets people upset, what makes people sing, all of those kinds of things. And, we need that feedback from customers in order to keep, keep innovating and keep our toehold in the marketplace. Because if you don't know what your customers want, again, you probably don't have a viable business. So in that sense, we all, as consumers, have a part to play in fostering innovation. And another thing I believe in strongly is we don't encourage innovation at an early enough age. We start talking about it once you get to high school or university, perhaps. You know, why not try to build like really, really interesting ways of, you know, encouraging creativity and lateral thinking and so on in children at a young age, because then it just comes second nature. I would think that would increase the quantum of ability or capability for innovation as they move through life. You know, I think it's providing the right tools and building those skills and capabilities. You can build them in adults and young, you know, high school students and so on. We run all sorts of, you know, I'm often a judge for innovation weeks and things where people work on projects in schools and primary schools and high schools. So, you know, we're trying to get out there and encourage innovation in many different levels. But I think that, you know, you can actually through training development and so forth, build those skills and capabilities, and sometimes they're industry specific or organizational specific. So it, you know, it should be done in a variety of settings and a variety of means. But you know, it's about continuous learning, and that's what is really important. So I think we have lots of potential. There's such a rich history in Australia. And, you know, you probably know something about innovations from your home countries and so on. But I think we need to, you know, we need to, in Australia, keep encouraging that. We have some mechanisms by which we do that in some of our programs here at the university. But we also, you know, we also can encourage people at all walks of life to be more innovative and think more out of the box. And there are many people who are just hobby inventors, you know, and sometimes they come up with really good ideas too. For Australia, because I've been working on a number of pieces of research over the last few years, I think there are some areas in Australia where we're very good and we have extremely good potential for, you know, for innovating in the future. And I think they come out of these areas, I think as engineers, wow, you know, this is a great field of opportunity. Science as well, anything with technology and IT. And I think engineers of the future will have to become sort of more generalists as well, you know, being able to be comfortable across a variety of technological platforms, IT platforms, and so on. Biotech is a big area where I think there's a lot of innovation to be done, a lot of money to be made as a result. In medicine, well, the march for the vaccine is the thing that comes to mind immediately. Food and food technology, I've talked about that before. I think that Australia has this reputation of being clean, green, and pristine in terms of the environment. Therefore, our food and food products, beverage products, things like that are considered to be, well, they're highly valued, and we get good money for them. So that's really important. And we're also finding in Australia that, you know, companies that are into, you know, vitamin supplements, health and beauty, we're getting such great opportunities for innovation that is driven by consumer demand in other parts of the world. So the Swiss company, for example, you might be familiar with that that brand, but they've just recently, you know, sold to a consortium overseas, and you know, they started as a family based company doing these supplements and making them in their family kitchen. So an incredible story. You know, you can Google that if you have time or interest. But there's so many interesting stories that come out of the Australian landscape. Depending on where you will end up in your career or where you will end up living in this big world of ours, it depends on where you are and what you're doing, how the innovation journey will affect you. But I do wish you well on that journey, because I think we all have much to contribute. And, you know, there is so much value to be created. It's just an enormous area of potential. So I wish you well with all of that. There's a bit of literature there if you like. I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay, so that's it for part 2. And next week we're going to be looking at case study of Samsung, which I'm going to post so that you can read it before week 11. I will also give syndicates the opportunity to submit. There'll be some questions about the case. I will invite syndicates to answer. I'll do the same that I did with the first strategy activity. Now, I know I said that was for your participation marks, but some of the groups will not get full participation marks because the effort that they went to was simply not, it was very little effort. Some of the groups did fantastically well, and I think we could see that in the recap lecture that some of the contributions were great. This is an opportunity for some of those syndicates that didn't do quite so much work to make a few extra participation marks. It's also an opportunity for you to really get a bit of feedback, because I'll do another recap lecture. So if you submit something, I will actually put it in the PowerPoint slideshow and I will go through it. So there's lots of reasons why you should probably do this. And we would normally be doing it in a workshop situation, face-to-face in the class. So I think I was pleased with the way we made it work this semester with the first activity. So I'll do the same thing with the Samsung case. So there'll be a recap lecture with PowerPoints if you send them to me. So just have a look at the instructions for the Samsung case. Have a read of the case before week 11. And then in week 11, we're going to be having from 11 till 12, we will have a live session. And I will be talking about just the recap of topics, dealing with any questions you might have about the individual assignment. And Graham will be joining us to talk about his half of the exam, and then I'll share with you the details about what to expect from my half of the exam. So next week, week 11, is going to be quite jam-packed, but I think if you engage in the strategy activity with the Samsung case, there's a lot to be, there's a lot to be gotten out of it. So I will look forward to your submissions, and if you just have a look at the instructions, you'll be able to see the deadline and so on, and we'll run it the same way we did with the previous strategy activity. I think it worked well, and I was really pleased with the outcome. So keep up the good work. And look, take care. I'm signing out now. I'll see you in week 11. Bye for now.